For people in the Middle Ages, the very question of when the year began was not simple. Unlike today, where January 1st marks the start everywhere, medieval Europe had many competing calendars. In some regions, the year began on March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, when the angel was said to have appeared to Mary. Elsewhere, Christmas Day or even Easter marked the turning of the year. January 1st slowly gained ground, but it was not universal until much later. Thus, the new year might come in spring, winter, or even move with the church calendar. These shifting dates reflected the power of the church. Time was not only measured by the seasons, but by sacred festivals. The choice of when a year began was tied to religious meaning. March connected to new life, Christmas to the birth of Christ, Easter to resurrection. Each date carried symbolic weight, and peasants accepted the rhythm set by priests and rulers. Unlike our fixed modern calendar, the medieval year was fluid, bending to local tradition and spiritual authority. Still, people sought a way to mark the passage of years, no matter the official date. In towns and villages, the new year was often celebrated when lords or church leaders declared it so, blending official proclamations with popular festivities. Peasants might not fully grasp the technicalities of the calendar, but they understood the joy of a turning point, a chance to feast, pray, and hope for better fortune. The moment when one year ended and another began was less about exact dates and more about renewal. This flexibility shows us how different medieval life was from our own. Today we watch clocks strike midnight, but for centuries there was no single moment of transition. Instead, New Year's was scattered across seasons, each version colored by local custom. To live in the Middle Ages meant living in a world where even time itself was uncertain, measured by both the heavens and the church, and where New Year could mean different things depending on where one stood. For medieval people, the church was the keeper of time itself. Bells marked the hours of the day, and feast days structured the year. Naturally, the New Year was also framed through Christian meaning. In many places, it was treated less as a moment of noisy celebration and more as a time for prayer and reflection. Services were held to bless the coming year, and priests urged villagers to confess sins, make peace with neighbors, and prepare their souls for God's judgment. The first day of the year was seen as setting the tone not only for earthly fortune, but for salvation itself. Liturgical calendars varied across Europe, and with them the way New Year was observed. Where the year began at Christmas, it was tied to the joy of Christ's birth and the renewal of light in the darkest days. Where it fell at Easter, it carried the weight of resurrection, symbolizing a new life for both the faithful and the world. In all cases, the New Year was not simply a social milestone. It was a sacred moment woven into the rhythm of Christian belief. The Church also condemned older pagan practices that lingered around New Year festivities. Priests warned against bonfires, dancing, or fortune-telling, labeling them superstitious or sinful. Yet these customs persisted, blending with church rituals in a way typical of medieval culture. A villager might attend Mass in the morning, then join neighbors in merriment by nightfall. The sacred and the profane lived side by side, each shaping the character of the holiday. Ultimately, the influence of the Church gave the New Year a seriousness often absent in modern times. It was not only about feasting or rejoicing, but about aligning oneself with divine order. To greet the New Year properly was to honor God and ensure heavenly favor in the days to come. For peasants and lords alike, faith turned the passing of time into something more than earthly. It became part of eternity. Long before the Church fixed its holy days, Europeans had marked the turning of the year with rituals tied to the sun. The winter solstice, when the nights were longest and light began to return, was a moment of awe and danger. Fires were lit on hillsides to drive away darkness, and offerings were made to ensure the sun's return. For peasants whose survival depended on fertile fields and healthy livestock, the cycle of light and dark was more than symbolic. It was life itself. These customs lingered into the Middle Ages, coloring the way people thought of the new year. In many villages, traces of pagan feasts survived beneath Christian layers. The burning of great logs, later known as the Yule log, came from older rituals of fire and renewal. Evergreen branches decorated homes, symbolizing life persisting in winter's death. In some regions, masked figures roamed from house to house, bringing luck or demanding gifts, echoes of ancient fertility rites. Though priests condemned such acts, they were too deeply woven into peasant life to disappear. Instead, they blended with the church's festivals, reshaping the medieval New Year into a mix of prayer and revelry. Superstitions also carried forward. It was believed that spirits roamed most freely during the dark days around the solstice, and that the boundary between worlds grew thin. To protect themselves, villagers lit fires, wore charms, or avoided certain tasks during these nights. Farmers read signs in the stars or in the behavior of animals, convinced that what happened in the liminal time of the year's turning foretold the harvest to come. For them, the New Year was not only a celebration but a moment of cosmic significance. This blending of pagan and Christian traditions shows how fluid medieval culture was. The Church sought to sanctify the year, yet the memory of older beliefs endured in fires, greenery, and rituals of luck. To celebrate the New Year in the Middle Ages was to stand at the crossroads of two worlds, one of saints and scripture, the other of spirits and seasons. Both spoke to the same human longing, to begin again, to find hope in the darkest days, and to believe that the turning of time could bring renewal. Preparation for the New Year looked very different depending on where one lived. In bustling towns, merchants stocked stalls with extra bread, ale, and candles, ready for the crowds who wanted to feast or hold vigils. Church bells were polished, altars adorned, and choirs rehearsed for special services. Inns prepared for travelers who came to join the celebrations, and markets filled with the noise of bargaining as people bought treats beyond their daily fare. The town became a stage, with guilds and parishes competing to host the most splendid observances. In villages, the scene was humbler but no less important. Families gathered what they could, saving a pig for slaughter, brewing ale, or baking sweetened bread if honey or spices were available. The hearth became the center of preparation, with fires kept burning brightly to symbolize warmth and hope for the year ahead. Neighbors lent one another small supplies, knowing that generosity on the threshold of a new year was a blessing that might return in kind. Even in poverty, peasants tried to set the table with something festive, for it was believed that how you ate on the new year foretold how you would eat for the rest of the year. Decoration played a role as well. Evergreen boughs, remnants of pagan custom, were hung in cottages to symbolize endurance and life. In towns, processions were organized with banners unfurled and sometimes pageants staged to tell biblical stories. In villages, groups of young people went door to door in costume, singing or offering blessings in exchange for small gifts of food. These customs blurred the line between sacred ritual and communal fun, weaving both into the fabric of the holiday. The days of preparation were charged with anticipation. Whether in a crowded town square or a smoky village hall, people looked forward not only to feasting but to fellowship. The New Year was a rare pause in the grind of medieval life, a time to reflect, rejoice, and imagine that the coming months might be kinder. From lords to peasants, everyone shared in the hope that with prayer, ritual, and festivity, fortune could be nudged toward abundance and peace. At the heart of any medieval New Year celebration lay the feast. Food was not simply nourishment, but a symbol of fortune and generosity, and tables were prepared as richly as circumstances allowed. In noble halls, the banquet was a spectacle. Roasted boars' heads carried in with pomp, pies stuffed with meat or fish, trenchers of bread piled with stews, and flagons of spiced wine. Exotic spices, cinnamon, ginger, saffron, signaled wealth, for they traveled long routes from the east. To dine lavishly on the New Year was to proclaim power and abundance for the year to come. For peasants, the fare was simpler, but no less meaningful. A pig fattened through the year might be slaughtered at this time, shared among family and neighbors. Ale brewed in autumn reached readiness by midwinter, filling mugs with warmth. Bread was baked with extra care, sometimes shaped into rounds or marked with a cross for blessing. If honey or dried fruit could be spared, it transformed ordinary porridge into a festive dish. These meals were modest compared to noble banquets, but they carried the same hope, that starting the year with full bellies would bring plenty. Fasting and prayer often preceded the feast, reminding all that the year should begin with both humility and joy. The meal itself was part ritual, part indulgence. In monasteries, brothers ate in silence, listening to scripture as they consumed fish, legumes, and bread. In contrast, lords and their guests dined amid music, laughter, and toasts. Even peasants found time for merriment, turning meager food into celebration through shared company. Everywhere, the act of eating together bound communities, affirming that they faced the coming year not alone, but united. The symbolism of food reached beyond the table. The first bite of bread, the first sip of ale, the first cut of meat, all were laden with meaning. Some believed that eating well at the year's start ensured good health, while others thought it warded off misfortune. Whatever the belief, the feast was more than a meal. It was a prayer made edible, a promise that the new year would bring sustenance, strength, and perhaps a measure of joy. The new year in the Middle Ages was not only a time for prayer and feasting, but also for merriment. Once tables were cleared, towns and villages filled with laughter, music, and play. Street performers, jesters, and traveling musicians joined the celebrations, drawing crowds into lively squares. Children tossed dice made of bone, while adults wagered on games or tested their strength in contests. For a brief time, the rigid divisions of medieval life softened, and laughter replaced toil. Masquerades were especially popular. People donned animal skins, painted masks, or simple costumes, transforming into symbolic figures of fortune, fertility, or folly. Groups of masked revelers paraded from house to house, singing songs and offering blessings in exchange for food, drink, or coins. Though the church frowned on such disguises, calling them remnants of pagan tradition, they persisted, for they allowed people to step outside their daily roles. A peasant could, for one night, become a lord in jest, and laughter dissolved boundaries of rank. Music and dance enlivened every hall and street. Fiddles, drums, and flutes set the rhythm as villagers joined in circle dances or clapped to bawdy songs. In noble courts, minstrels entertained with refined performances, telling tales of heroes and saints. In taverns, the atmosphere was rougher. Drunken games, rowdy songs, and arguments that sometimes ended in fists or knives. Still, both lord and peasant shared the same need for release, and the new year gave permission to abandon restraint, if only for a night. These entertainments were not mere distractions, but carried meaning. Masks were thought to ward off evil spirits, dances to bring fertility to the fields, and songs to bless the household. Laughter was not separate from belief, but part of it, a way of chasing away misfortune and welcoming the unknown year with courage. In their games and masquerades, medieval people sought not only joy, but also power over fate, wrapping their hopes in music, disguise, and communal delight. Gift-giving at the New Year was a cherished tradition across much of medieval Europe. It was not only a gesture of kindness, but a way to seal loyalty, display generosity, and ensure luck for the coming year. Lords presented gifts to their vassals, coins, cloth, or food, while peasants offered their landlords small tokens such as poultry, bread, or honey. Even within families, gifts circulated, though often simple: a pair of woolen mittens, a carved spoon, or a ribbon. These exchanges carried symbolic weight, showing that bonds of duty and affection would endure into the new year. The church encouraged offerings as well, urging the faithful to begin the year with charity. Coins dropped into alms boxes, food given to the poor, or candles donated to the parish were all believed to draw heavenly favor. In some towns, guilds exchanged gifts among members, strengthening ties of fraternity. Such acts were not mere charity, but investments in spiritual and social capital, for generosity was expected to return in blessings, protection, or reciprocal kindness. Among the people, gifts often carried an element of superstition. To receive something sweet at New Year, honey, dried fruit, or spiced wine, was to ensure a year filled with happiness. To give bread promised abundance, while salt symbolized preservation and health. In some regions, the first person to enter a house in the new year, known as the first footer, was expected to bring a token: coal for warmth, grain for food, or wine for cheer. Their presence was believed to shape the fortune of the household for the months ahead. Though the scale of gifts varied with wealth, the spirit behind them was the same: to bind communities with gestures of goodwill. In a world of hardship and uncertainty, the act of giving carried hope that fortune could be shared, softened, and multiplied. To exchange gifts at the threshold of the year was to declare that no one faced the coming days alone, but together, tied by generosity, duty, and the fragile but vital thread of human kindness. Music was at the heart of medieval New Year celebrations, uniting rich and poor alike in moments of joy. In noble courts, minstrels and troubadours performed refined songs, accompanied by lutes, harps, and recorders. These performances often carried both entertainment and instruction, weaving moral lessons into tales of knights and saints. Dancers moved gracefully in elaborate halls, their steps rehearsed, their costumes rich with color and embroidery. For the nobility, music and dance were symbols of status as well as pleasure. In villages, the sounds were rougher but no less spirited. Drums, fiddles, bagpipes, and simple flutes created rhythms for circle dances that anyone could join. The steps were simple and repetitive, made for groups that spanned ages and classes. Children laughed as they skipped, while elders clapped along from the sidelines. Songs were bawdy or humorous, filled with jokes and local gossip. Laughter mixed with the crackling of bonfires, and the cold winter night echoed with voices raised in cheerful chorus. Taverns carried their own brand of festivity. Ale flowed freely, and sailors, merchants, and peasants alike joined in raucous songs. Dice rattled on tables while fiddlers played louder to be heard over the noise. Dances broke out in cramped spaces, with boots stamping and mugs sloshing. Though fights sometimes erupted in the haze of drink, these gatherings were vital outlets, allowing men and women to forget the hardships of winter and the weight of duty if only for a night. Across all levels of society, music and dance transformed the new year into more than a marker of time. They were rituals of renewal, channels for hope, and reminders of community. Whether in gilded halls or muddy village squares, the joy of rhythm and movement carried the same message. Life, though harsh, still offered moments of celebration. The medieval New Year, in song and dance, was a defiant declaration that light and laughter would not be crushed by darkness. For medieval people, the turn of the year was a moment charged with meaning. It was believed that what happened on the first day foretold the fortunes of the months ahead. To wake in good spirits, to eat well, and to share kindness were all seen as signs of luck. A quarrel or misfortune on New Year's Day, by contrast, cast a shadow over the whole year. Peasants and nobles alike treated the day with care, watching every sign and action as if fate itself was keeping tally. Animals often played a role in these omens. A rooster crowing at dawn was taken as a blessing, while an owl's hoot near the house signaled misfortune. If cows produced plenty of milk on the first day, it promised abundance, but if they refused, it was a warning. The behavior of dogs, horses, or even birds in the sky was read as a message about the year to come. The natural world was a mirror, and people believed it revealed the secrets of destiny. Weather signs were also watched closely. A bright, clear dawn suggested prosperity, while heavy clouds or storms predicted hardship. Snow on New Year's Day could mean good harvests, but fog was seen as a bad omen. Farmers looked for patterns in the wind, believing that whichever direction it blew from on that day would shape the year's weather. These superstitions gave a sense of control over forces that were otherwise impossible to predict. Though many of these beliefs blended pagan and Christian traditions, they reflected the same need for hope in uncertain times. Omens gave people reassurance or warning that the future was already written in the small details of the present. To celebrate the new year was therefore not only to eat, drink, and dance, but to listen closely for the whispers of fate in the cry of a bird, the shape of a cloud, or the laughter of a child. The new year was not only a time for joy, but also for fear of what unseen forces might bring. To ward off evil, villagers lit great bonfires, believing the flames would drive away demons that wandered most freely in the dark nights of winter. Crosses were drawn on doors, incense burned, and salt scattered across thresholds to keep malevolent spirits at bay. Priests blessed houses, while peasants tied charms to animals and hung sprigs of evergreen above doors. Every act carried the same message. The coming year had to be defended as much as welcomed. Alongside protection came the urge to know the future. Divination thrived at the threshold of the year, despite the church's warnings. Young women dropped shoe boots into courtyards to see which way marriage awaited them. Farmers poured molten lead into cold water to read shapes that foretold crops or fortune. Others listened for the first visitor of the year, believing his appearance, rich or poor, cheerful or grim, would decide their fate. Dreams on New Year's night were also studied carefully, for they were thought to carry prophetic truths whispered by the unseen. These practices reveal a culture balanced between faith and superstition. Official sermons told people to place trust in God, but the common folk clung to older rituals, convinced that luck could be coaxed or misfortune avoided through simple acts. For peasants, these customs gave comfort in a world of hunger, disease, and uncertainty. Even nobles, with all their wealth, indulged in omens and predictions, showing that the human need to glimpse the future crossed all ranks of society. Looking back, the medieval New Year was far removed from our modern fireworks and champagne. It was a time when prayer, feast, and fear mingled in equal measure. Each flame, charm, or omen carried the weight of hope that the year ahead would not bring famine, war, or plague. Their celebrations remind us that while the calendar has changed, the longing for renewal, protection, and joy remains the same. In every age, the new year is both a door and a promise, an invitation to step into the unknown with courage, faith, and hope.